Welcome back to Elections 2017. This is a live simulcast of the program coming to you on radio and TV. Observers, whether they are local or international, are important stakeholders in any democratic elections. In Papua New Guinea, we have hosted observers from both the local and international scene who keep an eye on the way elections are run and whether they comply with the laws, basically just to see if the elections are complying with the laws and the system of democracy. The observers often gain a perspective of the electoral process few others of us get, but frequently observing can be tiring and a risky job. The role of the observer is often, not well understood, and so at times they are met with suspicion. And Transparency International, PNG, has been one organization that has been involved in observing and reporting on the past two national elections of Papua New Guinea. These were the 2007 and the 2012 elections. In the last election, TI-PNG launched its biggest observation yet, comprising close to 300 observers. On elections 2017, we are joined by Transparency International PNG Chairman Lawrence Stevens to talk about the observations they carried out then. Mr. Stevens, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Elections 2017.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, Transparency International is a worldwide organization. It has a country chapter in Papua New Guinea. Please explain to our viewers and the listeners, of course, what Transparency International does.
Well, it's a worldwide movement. There's well over 100 chapters internationally. Here in Papua New Guinea, TI has existed for 20 years. The main reason for its existence is to assist, improve the government system. It's civil society saying we need to be better, let's help the system become better. And so we become involved in things like the elections, like election awareness, like election observation, and we're involved in a number of other things, observations of how government's working and suggestions on how government can be improved.
In 2007, you decided to get involved in elections by observing. Tell us about that.
Well, it's come over a long journey. The founder of Transparency International Papua New Guinea was Sir Anthony Siagaru. He had also been a member of Parliament and he had a particular interest in the conduct of elections. But the reality is the election is part of a very important government process. And so Transparency was interested because we wanted to be sure that people were confident that the system, the electoral system, was working and that people were being freely and fairly elected.
And in 2012, you launched one of your biggest election observation, close to 300 observers right across the country. Tell us about the involvement of TI-PNG in observing the elections then.
Huge task, present in almost every province and in various polling stations in those provinces. A large group, 282, I think precisely, of volunteers who actually observed, monitored what was taking place and presented reports back, which were compiled into a report, which we then presented to the Electoral Commission and to government and to the Parliament so that people could see what we saw as being what had happened and suggestions on how we felt people might be able to improve the system.
The Transparency International report titled 2012 Papua New Guinea National Parliamentary Elections is available on their website, which is www.transparencypng.org.pg. Mr. Stevens, in this report, you have described the elections of 2012 as greatly flawed. What has led to this conclusion?
I guess the main thing was the percentage of people who suggested that it was either very flawed or seriously flawed, put it that way. And so it was something in the order of 27%. 21% of polling places observed the election was either mostly unfair or very unfair. And a large number of people were said to have been deprived of their right. So this is massive.
For our viewers on your screen would be the statistics of the Transparency International findings, which will come on for you. Mr. Stevens, you can continue.
It'd be good to see those statistics, but I take it that the viewers can see them, not necessarily I. The reality was that when the information was compiled, we had a large number, and if you say 21%, that's 2 out of every 10 people voting who felt that it was unfair. They're issues that we felt needed to be addressed, and so they became part of the observation. And the term greatly flawed is around that. You don't disenfranchise that number of people and feel that you've done a good job. You need to look at that and think, now how can we improve on this next time round?
Okay, prior to the 2012 elections, just months before it, even from 2011 leading on to the elections in 2012, Papua New Guinea experienced a series of political and constitutional events. Mr. Stevens, to your observation, have these events impacted the elections then?
I imagine that they did, but among those events were suggestions that the election be deferred, and that was of great concern to us. The build-up to that saw a lot of political upheaval and saw suggestions that the Constitution should be ignored perhaps or amended slightly to allow for a deferral. Luckily, good sense prevailed and that didn't happen. The elections went ahead as scheduled. But people must have been affected by what had happened in those months leading up to it, and it was possibly to the advantage of the incumbent government to have power at the time to be able to put their messages across.
Okay, we are talking to Transparency International Chairman, Mr. Lawrence Stevens, on election observations and what Transparency International had observed in the last national election. Mr. Stevens, there are numerous issues covered in your elections report, and I'd like to go through a number of them with you, to our viewers and our listeners. For your involvement, comments or questions, you can get in touch with us through phone line 325-3339, and that is for your comments and questions as contributions. Mr. Stevens, back to the report. As I've said, there are over a number of issues covered in that report. I'd like to narrow on a few of them. First being the electoral roll. Now, in every elections, electoral rolls are important, very important. In your report, there were findings that people were not happy with the electoral rolls. A number of them, a number of observations concluded that if the electoral rolls are flawed, there could not be any better elections if the rolls are flawed.
And that's been a concern throughout the history of elections in Papua New Guinea. And it certainly was a concern once again. In my own polling station, I detected several families who appeared on several rolls at different polling stations. There were errors, and it seemed important that those errors be attended to. There's also the question of adequate identification of electors and whether in having their names included in the roll, due process has taken place there. But I'd say that people generally felt that mostly the electoral roll was reasonably well handled. However, the inadequacies were still very apparent, and it was clear that a large amount of work was going to be needed to get that sorted out.
Rolls were a problem, Mr. Stevens, and there were instances, there are reports in your report that people were voting in someone else's place, or people were voting on behalf of someone without their consent. There was also this experience about people coming with election slips. Tell us about that.
Well, people coming with notes on which they had written the candidate and the candidate they were going to support. In some ways that is reasonable, but it was in fact happening. There was a suggestion, and in fact I saw something along those lines, where people were being given advice as they approached the polling station as to who they should vote for, and were actually being handed little slips to assist them.
Is this a good? Is this a way of helping identifying voters and giving them the chance to vote?
This seemed to have more to do with the supporters of individual candidates giving suggestions to people on how they should be voting. It could be argued that it's reasonable for candidates to give a how to vote card. That is reasonable, telling people that they should vote 1, 2, 3 in the following order. But there are questions about those slips of paper when they actually give the name of a voter and encourage the person standing in the queue to present him or herself as that voter and be ticked off on that. There were evidence of that happening on occasions too.
Okay, and in one instance, your observers observed an electorate where 2 electorates polled twice on the same day. It's a case of location, according to your report. How did we miss this out?
You have to give me the specific details of that one. Did you say 2 electorates voting on the same day?
Same polling, yeah.
At the same polling station?
Okay.
I don't have those details in front of me, so I'd have to have my mind refreshed on that one.
This is Elections 2017 you're watching and listening to. We'll be back after this break.